Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Needens. I'm one of the social workers here at KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And we're going to talk about something that I would guess is pretty familiar to you, and that is good days and bad days. And just talk about that concept and sometimes how we perceive it, absorb it, react to it. So when we think about good days and bad days, it's important to kind of figure out what defines that. What are the symptoms that we're really talking about when we think about having particularly a bad day? Oftentimes it relates to these three things: mood, cognition, and physical symptoms, significantly fatigue. So we're going to talk about those three things, kind of the whys and what the expectations should be, and the considerations to navigate that. As we relate to mood, what does that typically mean? That may mean that you feel more compromised in terms of how you cope. I work with many people who have this wonderful, positive spirit, and it is not realistic in this life for any of us to be without feelings like sadness, frustration, anxiety at times. So there may be times that you just are blue, that might be part of what comprises a bad day. May or may not be attached to anything specific. You may try to tell yourself, I don't have anything to feel sad about, I'm a positive person and I've got lots of blessings, or whatever that self-talk is, but it may not be related to anything. That sometimes there will be days that the mood is lower, and it certainly can be part of a normal grief experience. There is good life to be lived. You have lots of capacity. There's lots of strategies to figure out quality of life for yourself and keep living a life that you enjoy, that's meaningful. That does not mean that there's no grief attached with this. Of course, there's grief attached. If you have been diagnosed with a dementia, if you've been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease, early Lewy body dementia, MCI, whatever it is, of course, there's some grief attached to that. Of course, there's some a piece of you who wish that wasn't the case. And so it can be attached to that. Again, we're talking about good days, bad days. That's different than sustained bad days, which might be more indicative of something like depression. So, but periodically just having those blue days, I think, is pretty normal. Can be symptomatic of partially resolved or resolving depression. So as you heard me just say, if the trend continued, we might be more concerned about a depression. Some of you may take, for example, antidepressants, and when you get started on those medications, we do not expect you to go from very depressed to, and whatever depressive symptoms like anxiety is being manifested, to fully resolved in a short period of time. These are medicines that take 6 to 8 weeks to get full benefit. And sometimes providers have to adjust the dose. And so as that is being worked on, certainly there can be good days and bad days. And what we expect is that the bad days diminish and the good days increase. So we expect to see a trend in the right direction, but we don't expect elimination. And there are times when whatever intervention for your depression has been integrated, whether that's an antidepressant or structure or whatever, that it helps, but it's still not, it still doesn't fully address the depression. So if that is the case, if it's partially resolved, that's a conversation with someone. But resolving depression, again, give it some time. And then can be related to overstimulation, and that might be tricky to figure out, because you may be a person that was the life of the party and you like to be in the thick of things, and maybe that works for you, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's harder to sort through all the conversations going on in a big room with lots of people. And because of that, the mood lower the next day. So we pay attention to some of that. Cognition, I've had lots of people tell me that there are days they just feel, quote, foggy. And I have many wonderful people that I work with in early stage who will say that sometimes, even in the day, that as the day progresses, that there might be times of just feeling a bit more foggy. Sometimes people say, you know, describe it almost as dizzy, but when you drill down on what that means, it's really not dizzy. It's really more about I'm not thinking as clear as I typically am. Fluctuation is part of the disease. So let's get this in our heads, because I want you to be realistic about expectations on yourself and to plan and navigate it. So if you have, for example, early stage Alzheimer's disease, we expect some fluctuation. We expect some days are just harder than others. There are things that we can do, but there's going to be some days that it's just not as good as other days. Certainly true in diseases like Lewy body dementia, where that fluctuation is part and parcel. So we expect some fluctuation. It does not mean you're taking some significant step down in dementia. It doesn't mean things are hopeless. It doesn't mean that there's not ways to navigate and minimize some of that, but the fluctuation is part of the disease. Often you might experience it in processing or procedural memory. Sometimes people will tell me, my short-term memory is worse today. But oftentimes what bothers people the most is processing. Maybe you're sitting down and working on something on the computer and you're just not getting it. You're getting frustrated, or working on a home project, something that you could have done easily, and today you're having a hard time. So it's those kind of things that I think are the most frustrating. And again, there's a way to kind of think through that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Can be related to your schedule. Perhaps you've packed too much in it. Perhaps you've had a hectic couple of weeks or a couple of days, and today you just, your mind just needs to rest. And schedule doesn't relate just to keeping up with the pace. There's a lot of mental fatigue that goes into some activities. So really paying attention to your schedule. We're going to talk about that, and level of expectation. Some of you have been high achievers. Some of you have been overachievers. Some of you have been hard on yourself in your life. Some of you have expected so much, and maybe you were able to perform. Maybe you were able to pull it out of the bag in your life. Maybe you were able to rise to all occasions, but now maybe there's a way to grow from that, and maybe we need to realistically look at those expectations to maximize our capacity. And then lastly, bad days meaning fatigue or physical symptoms. If there are those of you who have early onset Lewy body, again, that fluctuation in terms of the physicality is expected. So people will say, gosh, my legs are not working as well today. I'm not moving as well today. Some of that is expected, especially with that particular dementia process. But for others of you, for both Lewy body and other dementias, there can be days where there's just significant fatigue, and days where people, folks will tell me, gosh, I was busy and I really just had to have a day of sitting and watching TV, or I slept late and I felt like I needed to go back to bed and slept, and your care partners might tell me that you slept a big chunk of the day. And again, I don't necessarily worry about that if it's periodic. We expect some of that fluctuation. If there is a trend, then that's a bigger concern. if it's more bad than good, that's something that needs to be discussed. Can be related to a medical issue or age. There are those of you who are just absolutely remarkable, and you're doing great at, age upper 80s and 90. And, again, your expectations are, doing as you always have done. And, as we age, there is some fatigue that sets in on some of that. I mean, we're not going to have the same amount of energy we did. If you are 85, you're not going to have the same energy you did when you were 75. So we pay attention to that. And then medical issues. So, again, sometimes something, a virus, some other disease process. So it's not all in the dementia bucket. If we see a significant change in fatigue and physical symptoms, sometimes it can be related to something else. So we want to check that out or consider that, those of you with coexisting diagnosis. Can be related to schedule, as we talked about with cognition, and it can be related to expectations. It's back to that, are we realistic in our schedule, and can we balance it in some way with expectation? So considerations, space, fuller days with low key days. If you have a busy day, if there's a day you're volunteering, and that's great, then the next day, perhaps it's just a lower key day. You're gonna, accept that, maybe you're gonna spend a little bit more time behind the television, or a little bit longer nap, or those kind of things. Your expectations might need to be balanced a bit, and you can plan on that. You can, and so you don't beat yourself up for it. Just allow yourself more time to do things. If you've got that home project and 10 years ago you could have knocked it out in 1 hour, and good and well it might take you 4 hours now, then celebrate the fact you've got something to do for 4 hours. Celebrate the fact you can still do it. But maybe pace yourself. Maybe do it 2 hours, take an extended break, come back and do it, but allow the time. Don't always just persevere and push through. That's not going to work in this case, and can contribute to some of those bad days. So allow more time, that capacity, expectation, balance. And you're hearing me say, and I'm going to say it again because I want you to really, really hear me. Do not beat yourself up for this. Do not think that it translates to some worsening disease process or your value. It does not. It's just something that we have to navigate, and we plan for, and we figure out. If you see significant changes, for example, if you're if your family is seeing significant more confusion, if you're feeling more, extreme, rather an acute increase of fatigue, if you're seeing something significantly change, we need to rule out, is there any other medical contributors? You're sensitive to something called delirium, which is an acute and temporary state of enhanced confusion and inability, and it is all provoked by a change of some sort, including some kind of medical change. If you are a person with unresolved depression, we want to do that. You've heard me say before in these lectures, depression makes everything worse. Very important we keep our finger on that pulse. And so let's address and have conversation about unresolved depression. And then there's this last thing, which is so, so important. There's a lot of good in life. Life isn't perfect, but there's a lot of good in life. Let's just accept we can't be 100% all the time. We can't be. So if you have some good days, we're going to celebrate that. We're going to balance it with lower key days where expectations are low, and you're going to ride out that bad day, knowing that there are other good days ahead. If, as always, there are questions or concerns that you want to talk to, please reach out to us here at the ADRC. We would be glad to talk to you about it. We are in your corner. Take good care.